Key point 1. Trees. Give your brain a break from constant stimulation. Think about what your brain experiences during an ordinary day. You wake up, and before your feet even touch the floor, there may already be something asking for your attention. A phone notification, a message, an email, a headline, a reminder. Then you move into traffic, work, conversations, television, advertisements, and countless small decisions. Even when nothing dramatic is happening, your brain is constantly being asked to notice, evaluate, remember, compare, and respond. Now imagine doing something almost embarrassingly simple. Looking at a tree. You don't have to understand the tree. You don't have to answer it. You don't have to make a decision about it. It is simply there, and that simplicity matters. The human brain is extraordinarily good at processing information, but that does not mean it benefits from processing information every second of the day. Attention is not an unlimited resource. When we continually switch between tasks, screens, conversations, and thoughts, the mind can begin to feel crowded. You may recognize the sensation. You sit down to relax, but your thoughts keep jumping from one unfinished task to another. Then you look outside and notice a tree. Perhaps the leaves are moving slightly in the wind. Perhaps sunlight is passing between the branches. Maybe you notice that some leaves are bright while others are shaded. Nothing about this demands an immediate response. Your attention can settle without having to perform. That is the interesting part. Looking at nature does not necessarily mean your brain stops working. Instead, it may give your attention a different kind of job. Rather than forcing yourself to concentrate intensely on a difficult problem, you allow your attention to move gently through something simple and predictable. Consider the difference between staring at a complicated computer screen and watching branches move in the wind. The screen may contain dozens of pieces of information competing for your attention. The tree presents a much quieter scene. There is movement, but it is gradual. There is variation, but it is not shouting for your attention. This may be one reason a few minutes around trees can feel surprisingly refreshing. And notice something important. You don't need an enormous forest. You don't need to travel somewhere remote. A tree outside your window can be enough to create a small interruption in the day. You can sit for 2 minutes and simply observe. Look at the shape of the branches. Watch the leaves move. Notice the light. Listen to the wind if you can. And most importantly, resist the urge to turn the moment into another task. You are not trying to accomplish anything. You are allowing your brain to experience a few minutes in which nothing is demanding an answer. That may sound insignificant, but sometimes the smallest pauses are exactly what a busy mind needs. The tree does not tell you to hurry. It does not ask you to check your phone. It does not give you another problem to solve. It simply stands there, quietly demonstrating something that modern life often makes us forget. Not every moment has to be filled with information. Sometimes looking at something that asks nothing from you is a surprisingly powerful way to give your attention a little room to recover. Imagine your brain as a person sitting in a room, listening carefully for the next thing that might happen. A phone might ring. Someone might call your name. A car might suddenly honk. A message might arrive. A deadline might appear. Your brain does not necessarily get to choose which signals matter. It simply keeps monitoring the environment. This is useful. In fact, it is one of the reasons humans have survived for so long. But there is a problem. A system designed to notice danger and important changes can become exhausted when it is exposed to stimulation all day long. Modern environments are full of sharp sounds, flashing screens, crowded streets, advertisements, notifications, and rapid changes. Even when we are physically safe, the brain can behave as though it needs to remain prepared for the next interruption. Now compare that with sitting beneath a tree. There is still movement. The leaves sway. Shadows change. A bird might pass through the branches. The wind may become stronger and then weaker, but the environment usually changes gradually rather than demanding an immediate reaction. That difference is important. Nature gives the brain information, but often in a gentler form. Think about watching leaves move in the wind. You don't have to predict exactly where every leaf will go. You don't have to control the movement. You simply watch. Your eyes follow one pattern, then another. Your attention has somewhere to rest without being forced into intense concentration. This can create a sense of psychological distance from whatever was occupying your mind. Suppose you have spent an hour worrying about an argument, a financial problem, an unfinished task, or something you cannot control. The mind can become trapped in repetition. The same thought comes back again and again, like a song stuck on repeat. Then you walk outside. You see a tree. For a moment, your attention moves away from the internal conversation and towards something happening in the physical world. You notice the branches. You hear the wind. You feel the temperature on your skin. The problem may still exist, but you are no longer giving it every second of your attention. That is what makes a nature break different from simply telling yourself, "Stop worrying." Try telling yourself not to think about something, and the thought often becomes even louder. Instead, give your attention something gentle to observe. The tree becomes an anchor. And there is another lesson here. Calmness does not always arrive because we deliberately force ourselves to relax. Sometimes it emerges because we place ourselves in an environment that makes relaxation easier. You don't have to stare intensely at the tree. You don't have to meditate perfectly. You don't even need to understand what is happening inside your brain. Just look. Give yourself 5 quiet minutes. Watch how the branches move. Notice the spaces between the leaves. Observe how sunlight changes across the ground. The goal is not to escape reality. The goal is to stop reacting to everything for a moment. Of course, looking at trees is not a substitute for professional help when someone is experiencing serious or persistent anxiety, stress, or other mental health difficulties. But as an ordinary daily habit, spending a little time around nature can be a remarkably simple way to create a pause. And perhaps that is the real value. The world will continue making noise. Your responsibilities will still be waiting. Your phone will still receive messages. But for a few minutes, you can step outside and look at something that moves slowly, changes gradually, and demands nothing from you. Sometimes the brain doesn't need another solution. Sometimes it simply needs a quieter place to stand. We often think of attention as one simple thing. Either you are paying attention or you are not. But the brain has different ways of paying attention. There is the kind you use when reading a difficult book, solving a mathematical problem, driving through heavy traffic, or trying to remember an important instruction. This kind of attention requires effort. You deliberately hold your mind on one thing and push other distractions aside. That ability is extremely useful, but it can also become tiring. Imagine holding a heavy suitcase with your arms stretched out in front of you. You might manage it for a while, but eventually your muscles begin to complain. Your attention can behave in a similar way. Concentrating intensely for hours can leave you mentally tired, even if you have barely moved your body. This is where looking at trees becomes interesting. When you watch a tree, you usually don't need to concentrate in the same demanding way. Your eyes can move naturally from one branch to another. You might notice a leaf fluttering, then notice sunlight, then hear a bird. Your attention is involved, but it doesn't have to grip one tiny target with all its strength. This kind of gentle engagement is sometimes described as effortless or involuntary attention. Think about the difference between reading a complicated report and watching clouds move across the sky. With the report, you have to hold information in your mind. You have to understand sentences, remember previous points, and connect ideas. With the clouds, there is nothing you need to remember. You simply observe. Trees can provide something similar. They are interesting enough to capture your attention, but usually not demanding enough to exhaust it. And that distinction matters. Suppose you have been working on a problem for 2 hours. You read the same sentence 3 times. You know the answer is somewhere in your mind, but you can't seem to reach it. You get frustrated and decide to force yourself to concentrate harder. Sometimes that works, but sometimes the better decision is to stop. Walk outside, find a tree, look at it for a few minutes. You are not abandoning the problem. You are giving your attention a different environment. When you return, the problem may suddenly feel less overwhelming. The information was already in your brain. What changed was your mental state. This is one reason short breaks can be so valuable. A break isn't necessarily wasted time. It can be part of the process of maintaining good attention. And trees have another advantage. They don't require you to perform. A screen may encourage you to scroll. A television asks you to follow a story. A phone constantly presents new information. Even entertainment can demand continuous attention. A tree asks for nothing. You can look at it for 10 seconds or 10 minutes. You can notice details or simply gaze into the distance. There is no score. There is no notification saying you missed something. There is no pressure to respond. That freedom can be surprisingly refreshing. The lesson isn't that trees possess some magical power over the brain. The deeper lesson is that our attention needs variety. We cannot expect the mind to operate at maximum concentration indefinitely. Just as the body benefits from changing position, the mind may benefit from changing the way it pays attention. So the next time you feel mentally stuck, don't automatically reach for another screen. Try something simpler. Go outside if you can. Find a tree. Stand or sit comfortably. Look at the branches. Notice the movement of the leaves. Watch the patterns of light and shadow. Let your attention wander without judging it. For a few minutes, you don't need to solve anything. You simply observe. And when you return to your work, you may discover that the mind feels a little less crowded, a little less strained, and perhaps a little more ready to think. Sometimes better concentration doesn't come from forcing attention harder. Sometimes it comes from giving attention permission to rest. Stress has an interesting habit. It doesn't always arrive as one enormous event. Sometimes it builds quietly through dozens of small things. A message you haven't answered, a bill you need to pay, a conversation that didn't go well, a task you forgot, a decision you keep postponing. Each one may seem manageable on its own, but together they can create a mind that never seems to switch off. You finish one task and immediately think about the next. You solve one problem and remember another. You sit down to rest, but your mind continues working. This is what makes stress so exhausting. The body may be sitting still while the mind is running. Now imagine interrupting that pattern for just 5 minutes. You step outside and find a tree. Nothing about the tree solves your problems. Your responsibilities don't disappear. Your unanswered messages remain unanswered. But something important happens. Your attention is temporarily redirected. Instead of thinking about what happened yesterday or what might happen tomorrow, you begin noticing what is happening right now. The leaves are moving. The branches are swaying. The sunlight is changing. There may be a soft sound of wind passing through the leaves. You are still thinking, of course. The human brain doesn't have an off switch that we can simply press. But your thoughts may no longer have the entire stage. This is why a short nature break can be useful. It creates a boundary between one mental activity and another. Think of it like restarting a computer that has too many programs open. You don't necessarily throw the computer away. You simply give it an opportunity to stop carrying everything at once. The same principle can apply to your attention. To suppose you have spent the morning moving from one responsibility to another. At noon, instead of immediately checking your phone while eating, you walk outside for 5 minutes. You find a quiet place and look at the trees. For those 5 minutes, you don't analyze your schedule. You don't rehearse an argument. You don't calculate everything that could go wrong. You simply observe. That small interruption may help create psychological distance from the thoughts that were dominating your mind. And there is something powerful about making the practice small. People often think relaxation requires an hour of meditation, a weekend in the countryside, or a completely empty schedule. But life rarely gives us those conditions. 5 minutes, however, is possible for many people. Even 2 minutes can become a signal to your brain. We are allowed to pause. The important part is consistency, not perfection. You don't need a beautiful forest, a tree in a neighborhood, a park, a garden, or even a view from a window can provide an opportunity to pause. What matters is deliberately stepping away from constant stimulation and allowing yourself to observe something natural. Of course, this doesn't mean every stressful feeling will disappear. Trees are not a magical treatment for serious anxiety or overwhelming life circumstances. Sometimes we need conversation, practical solutions, rest, or professional support. but a pause can still matter. Imagine carrying a backpack filled with heavy objects. You don't have to throw the backpack away to feel relief. Sometimes you simply need to put it down for a moment. That is what a brief nature break can represent. You put the mental backpack down, you breathe, you look, you allow the world to exist without demanding anything from you. Then, after a few minutes, you pick up your responsibilities again. But perhaps you pick them up with a little more space in your mind. The tree hasn't fixed your life, it has simply interrupted the endless stream of reaction. And sometimes that interruption is enough to remind you that you are not required to respond to everything every second. There is always another message, another task, another problem. But there can also be another pause, and sometimes a few quiet minutes beneath a tree are enough to create that pause. We often imagine that when the brain feels tired, the answer must be to do something more. Learn something new, exercise harder, find a better productivity system, listen to another podcast, read another book, solve another problem. But what if the brain sometimes needs the opposite? What if it needs less? This is where looking at trees becomes more than a simple suggestion to spend time outdoors. The deeper lesson is about learning how to pause. Think about how rarely we allow ourselves to experience a moment without trying to use it. If we are waiting in line, we reach for the phone. If we are sitting alone, we turn on a video. If we are walking, we listen to something. If we have a few empty minutes, we fill them. We have become very good at eliminating silence. But silence has a purpose. Your brain is not a machine that becomes better simply by receiving more information. Information is useful, but processing information also requires mental resources. There is a difference between being stimulated and being refreshed. This is why a tree can be such an interesting object to look at. It doesn't entertain you in the usual sense. It doesn't demand that you keep watching. It doesn't tell you what to think. It simply gives your attention somewhere peaceful to rest. Imagine sitting near a tree in the late afternoon. The branches move slowly. Some leaves remain still while others flutter in the breeze. Light moves across the ground. Perhaps you hear distant sounds, but nothing requires an immediate response. For a few minutes, you don't have to accomplish anything. That can feel uncomfortable at first. The mind may immediately start producing thoughts. I should check my phone. I need to finish that task. What if this happens? I forgot to call someone. That's normal. The goal isn't to fight those thoughts. Let them appear. Then gently return your attention to the tree. Watch the leaves. Notice the movement. Feel your breathing. Look at the patterns of light. You are practicing something simple but valuable, returning to the present without demanding perfection from yourself. Over time, this can change your relationship with pauses. You begin to understand that doing nothing for a few minutes isn't necessarily laziness. Rest isn't the enemy of productivity. A quiet moment isn't automatically wasted time. Sometimes it is maintenance. We understand this with the body. If you exercise continuously without recovery, eventually your body becomes exhausted. The mind also needs periods when it isn't being pushed from one demand to another. And this doesn't mean you need to abandon technology or disappear into a forest. You can create small pauses within ordinary life. Look out the window before checking your phone in the morning. Walk beneath trees during lunch. Sit in a garden for 5 minutes. Watch the branches move before returning to your work. These moments may seem almost too small to matter, but a reset doesn't always have to be dramatic. Sometimes resetting means changing the direction of your attention. Instead of asking, "What should I do next?" you ask, "Can I simply observe for a moment?" Instead of trying to solve every thought, you allow some thoughts to pass. Instead of filling every empty space, you leave one space empty. That is the real lesson trees can teach us. They remind us that not everything needs to move quickly. A tree doesn't hurry toward tomorrow. It doesn't constantly compare itself with another tree. It doesn't worry about whether it is being productive. It simply grows, responds to light and weather, and exists within the rhythm of its environment. We don't have to imitate a tree literally. We still have responsibilities, ambitions, and problems to solve. But we can borrow one idea from it. Sometimes the healthiest thing we can do is stop demanding so much from ourselves for a little while. So the next time your mind feels crowded, don't automatically search for another solution. Step outside if you can find a tree. Look at it. Give yourself 5 quiet minutes. Nothing needs to be fixed during those 5 minutes. Nothing needs to be achieved. You are simply giving your brain permission to pause. And perhaps that is the reset we were looking for all along. Not a complicated technique, but a simple reminder that the mind doesn't always become clearer by thinking harder. Sometimes clarity begins when we finally stop.